National Treasury put out a new SBD4 a couple of years ago now. It's certainly post-COVID, but it's been out for some time, and it is applicable to PFMA, the new SBD4. However, been interested to see that a couple of municipalities and metros are starting to adopt the SBD4, probably because this one that PFMA have got is a combination of SBD4, SBD8, and SBD9. So in PFMA, there's no longer a need to include SBD8 and SBD9 as a standard bid document. But you'll notice that this is a bidder's disclosure, and it previously was referred to as the declaration of interest. It's now bidder's disclosure primarily because of the inclusion of, in particular, SBD9. Now, it was issued in 2022. This was Instruction 3 of 2022. The title of that instruction was Enhancing Compliance, Transparency, and Accountability in SEM. And it has in Section 7, where it spoke about this declaration, it says the SBD4 applies to all procurement, irrespective of the value and method of procurement, excluding petty cash purchases, and must be completed by all persons responding to the bid invitation. The point of this for ourselves here as procurement practitioners involved in procurement is the accounting officer, accounting authority must, as part of the evaluation of a procurement process, evaluate information provided by a person on SBD4. So that's a very explicit requirement, must evaluate the information provided by a person on the SBD4. And that in particular is the focus of this particular session. And there are other parts of SBD4 that I'm not going to get into today. I want to focus primarily on question 2.3. And if you look at section 2.3, this must be in the context of the SBD9. So when you look at the question, does the bidder or any of its directors, trustees, shareholders, members, partners, or any person having controlling interest in the enterprise have any interest in any other related enterprise, whether or not they are bidding? Now, yes, there are references here to interest, but they try to test whether there is potentially some collusive activity taking place here between the bidder that's completed this form and any other possible bidder. They're not talking about any relationship or connectedness with any of those in the evaluating committee or the procuring institution. They're trying to test here whether there's any collusion. And so when we look at that, it's a very easy yes/no answer to this particular question. But I say that with my tongue in my cheek because it's not that easy. Let's dive into that a little bit more. Firstly, there is the reference in this to a controlling interest. So it says, does the bidder or any of its directors, trustees, shareholders, members, partners, or any person having a controlling interest in the enterprise being the bidder's enterprise, have any interest in any other related enterprise, whether or not they are bidding for this contract? So at this point, I'm not going to get into what is meant by director, trustee, shareholder, members, partners. Just briefly talk about the reference here, or any person having a controlling interest, and maybe just attempt to unpack that briefly. If we look at the Competition Act, the Competition Act doesn't use the term controlling interest. It certainly uses the term control. The Companies Act, which is referenced by the Competition Act, the Companies Act also does not define controlling interest expressly, but it does link control to ownership of voting rights, ability to appoint directors, etc. There is certainly some case law out there, in particular the Competition Commission versus Aveng, And here they're saying we've got to look very carefully at this term controlling interest, and also see if there's any decisive influence. So even if somebody doesn't have the majority of shares, they may have some level of influence over that particular entity. The OECD, which is often referred to when discussing conflicts of interest, has reference to controlling interest, and they do that in the context of a holding company. A holding company is purely a financial concern which uses its capital solely to acquire interest, normally controlling interests in a number of operating companies. So OECD is referenced there. But my point here is that if we were to look at, certainly the SBD4 does not define controlling interest. Competition Act is not clear, although you certainly can interpret it. Competition Commission also, the case law refers to decisive influence. There isn't an explicit definition of what controlling interest is. And if I go back to this question, why is this even here? Does the bidder or any of its directors, trustees, shareholders, very difficult to respond to this, particularly if you're an entity trading on any potential stock exchange or equities exchange, members, partners, or any person having a controlling interest. So this could be then, I guess they're trying to say, is there potentially a holding company that might have an interest in another related enterprise, whether or not they're bidding for this contract. So just let's put a pin in that one. Controlling interest is referenced there. If I as a bidder have to understand this, it might not be that easy for me to understand what is meant by this controlling interest point. All right, so remember, this is a form that is meant to be completed by bidders. All of the bidders for anything from a quotation upwards needs to complete this form. They are expected then to understand what this means, and I've just given you a couple of references to say maybe it is not going to be that easy for the bidder to do so. Let's jump then to the next question, which is the question on related enterprise. Have any interest in any other related enterprise, whether or not they're bidding for this contract. Now, again, related enterprise is not defined in the SBD4. So again, because this is a test for potential collusive activity, we jump then to the Competition Act, which also does not use the term related enterprise directly. It also, again, it refers to the Companies Act, and the Companies Act is a lot more explicit in terms of related and interrelated persons and control. And if we have a look at that, it is quite explicit in terms of what they mean. So related or interrelated persons and control. I'm not going to get into this married, and the 2 degrees of separation point. That relates a lot more to the earlier question. Let's just focus on 2B. An individual is related to a juristic person if the individual directly or indirectly controls the juristic person as determined in accordance with the subsection 2. Very pleased that Chris is on today because I need some help from any lawyers. My understanding of juristic person is it also can mean an enterprise, another company. A juristic person is related to another juristic person if either of them directly or indirectly controls the other or the business of the other as determined in accordance with subsection 2. This is what we're going through here. Either is a subsidiary or other, a person directly or indirectly controls each of them or the business of each as determined in accordance with subsection 2. I don't have a slide on this one. I just want to also refer you to the Competition Act, where it talks about a common director between two bidders. So there's some reference there to, if you like, related enterprise. But again, it's not specifically defined as a related enterprise. So let's unpack this a little bit more now and see where this goes. So if a bidder then says yes, all right, so they answer yes to this particular question. One of the points then is what do they mean by yes? So is this yes in terms of directors, trustees, shareholders, etc.? And 2.3.1 says that if so, furnish the particulars. So perhaps they've said here there's a common director between the bidding company and ABC Enterprises, for example. Now, one of the folk that regularly attends these sessions, I'm not sure if she's online today, forwarded me an interpretation that she'd received from Treasury in 2019. And Treasury 19 very clearly said that their interpretation of related is in terms of common directors or holding company subsidiary relationship. It may not be the understanding of the bidder. Because why this was raised is there is a video on our YouTube channel where the person who was speaking at the time said they might interpret related enterprise to be related in terms of its activities. And I think the example that was used there is they may have another company that maybe sells Tupperware, and they might say, but that's not related to this particular bid, which is for construction, and therefore I'm not going to disclose it. Coming back to that a little bit later, just going to park that now. Let's just assume at this point that the bidder says yes, and they give this information. Be very careful, because this is happening, and bidders are sometimes very scared to answer yes, because when they answer yes, they get disqualified. Answering yes is not a basis for automatic disqualification. So just be sure that that is very clear. If they say yes, the evaluation team must then determine if the related enterprise has also submitted a bid. So remember that we started off in the opening saying you have to evaluate the information that's been submitted by the bidder. So now they've said yes here, and common director in ABC Enterprises, you then have to determine if there is a bid that has been submitted by ABC Enterprises. If there isn't a bid that ABC Enterprises or one of their controlling or holding companies submitted, then basically, as far as I can determine, there's no action that needs to be taken on your part. The bidder has said yes. They've given the information of the company that is related in their respect, and that particular company has not submitted a bid. So the possibility of any collusive activity at this point is probably fairly low. But if that company did submit a bid, my interpretation is you should not disqualify yet at this point, but process this in terms of the Competition Act. And I'm going to explain that a little bit further as we go, because it relates also to the next scenario. The next scenario is the bidder says no. The bidder says no, and there's absolutely no other company that these directors, trustees, shareholders, partners, or any other company has a controlling interest in, which is becoming far and far less probable. If they say no, and there clearly is no one else, then there is no issue. However, if they say no, and through further investigation, you look at CSD or the AG raises potentially something, then there are at least two scenarios to work through. One of those is if they did not disclose, but there is a related company and that non-disclosed company did not bid, then do you then say, well, they have misrepresented, and is that then a basis for disqualification? So let me unpack that shortly. But that certainly is one scenario. They said no. You find there's another company, but that company did not bid. Do you then say, hang on a sec, you've misrepresented? Or the other one is they said no, you found that there is another company, and that company also did submit a bid. We need to then unpack what that is. And again, it's related to the previous scenario around the Competition Act. Let's jump then to the first one around saying no, but there is a company. Let's have a look. What the instruction 3 also says is that when you do evaluate, the evaluation establishes that the conduct of a person constitutes a transgression of the Prevention and Combating Corrupt Activities Act. The conduct must be dealt with in accordance with PRECA. So now the bidder said, no, you figured out that there is another company. That company, however, did not bid. My suggestion is that you then follow a clarification process with that bidder. You do not disqualify them on the basis of misrepresentation. Because remember, we've just gone through related enterprise and there was no clear description of related enterprise. The bidder may have interpreted related enterprise to be the Tupperware example that I explained earlier and concluded, well, look, it's not related, therefore I'm not going to explain. But also, if I read the sentence, why did they even include the adjective related in here? Because without related, this still is a sensical question, or any interest in any other enterprise, whether or not they are bidding for this contract. Why have related? Surely the only reason they put related in here was to try and narrow the definition of the other enterprise that these bidders have an interest in. So it's not clear for me, and therefore I wouldn't feel comfortable disqualifying a bidder if they said no, and you then clarified with them, why did you say no? And they said, well, because it's a Tupperware company and it's got no active relationship. They're not bidding for this, and therefore that's why we didn't disclose. And so just saying no and not disclosing, I don't think is a basis for disqualification. And also, if you do disqualify on the basis of misrepresentation, be very careful. You cannot just disqualify a bidder and not do anything else. It's very clear. PRECA and misrepresentation is a criminal act. You've got to follow through. You can't just disqualify. You then also have to report them to SAPS. You also then have to start the process of either restriction or debarring them on the register for tender defaulters. And if there's any loss that you've suffered, you've got to start the process of civil recovery of the loss that you've suffered as a result of this. So you can't just disqualify. There's other processes that you have to follow. So I'd be very, very careful if somebody said no and you said, well, we found that you didn't, there is another company, you didn't tell us about this other company, therefore we're disqualifying you, and you don't take any further action. Be very careful. I would be very concerned if that was the case. If you did, however, then see no, you found the other company, and that other company then did bid. They did submit a bid. We then have to look at the Competition Commission, and let's have a look then at what the instruction. Remember, this is law as far as the PFMA is concerned. The instruction says that if there's a transgression of the Competition Act, have a look at this. The conduct must be reported to the Competition Commission. Must be reported to the Competition Commission. And also, if you have a look at 7.5, there is an and. So you can't say, well, we put in our bid document that if you misrepresented, then we will disqualify you. Or we put in our bid document that if you didn't do this, then we will disqualify you, and you make that your institution's policy. You can't just pick and choose one of these to act. there is clearly here potentially an act of collusion. You must report this to the Competition Commission. It's not an either or. You must report this to the Competition Commission if you find now that there is potentially some collusion that has taken place. Now, what if you report it to the Competition Commission? And that's what it says, right? It says must be reported to the Competition Commission. You report it to the Competition Commission. And the Competition Commission is the one that then will look into this and decide whether a collusive act has taken place or not. It's not the mandate, it's not your competence as a procuring institution to decide whether this bidder is guilty of collusion or not. You've got to wait now for the body who has got the competence to decide collusion, the Competition Commission. You've got to wait for them to decide whether there is collusion. Because if you disqualified them and they come back to you and they say there isn't collusion, you're going to have to do the high jump. That would be unjust. You've disqualified a bidder, and on the basis that there's collusion, and the competent authority, the Competition Commission, comes back to you and says there was no collusion, you're not going to be in a good place in that respect. So the point then is that that if you do report it, and we're often here on this platform, I reported this to the competition and they didn't come back to me in time. Absolutely. Then you use objective criteria 2.1F as the basis to award it to number 2. Don't disqualify them and then find out that you didn't have a good basis to disqualify them, and then you're in trouble. Rather allow the process to go through, and if that bidder is the one that is in contention, it's the number one scoring bidder in terms of price and specific goals, then you say, hang on a sec, there's urgency in our award. We cannot wait for the competition any longer to come back to us. There's a risk that this bidder could be found guilty by the Competition Commission of collusion. And if we were to award it to them, the risk to our institution then of irregular expenditure or fruitless and wasteful expenditure is high, and therefore we're going to use objective criteria 2.1F to give it to number 2. That's the basis that you use at that point. So if I was to summarize then that if a bidder says no, and you see that they're actually, and there are other companies, you've got to be very careful. The first one is if there's another company and that other company did not submit a bid, then rather give them the benefit of the doubt, ask them to clarify in writing. I would only do that if that's the one that's in contention. There's some debate around that one. But if there is a bidder that did also award and they said no, then you have to follow the process of reporting to the Competition Commission. Be very careful of just doing an outright disqualification. There we are.
All right. Morning, colleagues. Thank you, Shaun, for a nice presentation. I'm just worried that if we, okay, I think Tepo has raised, one of the interesting points, but I'm just worried that if we benchmark ourselves with him, we might find ourselves in an inconveniencing predicament, because he just declared that these are his neighbors. And if they didn't answer his email, he would have walked through and say, answer my email. And with the experience that we have, it's not practical that we would get such a prompt response from the Competitions Commission. And I'm also concerned on the basis that we might be looking at what we're trying to involve the competition on a possibility of delay.
Yeah.
Why I'm saying this is because not every procurement from 0 to unlimited is evaluated using the same bidder's disclosure. And maybe the high value procurement well, there could be attention to the Competitions Commission to try and address such situations because of the high risk. But what happens to the low value procurement? I'm talking about anything maybe from 0 up to $1 million.
Yeah.
Because we see a lot of that. We see
Yeah.
a lot of what you've just said now continuously, and you could see that this is a deliberate attempt to abuse the system.
Yeah.
And would it be practical, or would it be feasible to continuously, refer these matters to the Competition Commission? I'm not sure. And one of the challenges that we face, which leads us to just apply the provisions of the SBD4 as it is exactly what I think the previous speaker said, that we would have to invest in the bulletproof vest if we were to really do that. Because one, I think personally, the way I read the SBD4, it does have an element of enforcing itself. If you read the last paragraph,
The back end.
that's
Yeah.
I certify that the information furnished in paragraph 1 and 2, 1, 2, and 3 above is correct.
Yeah.
I accept that the state may reject the bid or act against me in terms of paragraph 6 of the PFMA instruction note 3 of 2122 on prevention and combating abuse in the supply chain management. So you have possible choices here. Do you want to disqualify the bid, or do you want to disqualify and act against the service provider? Which one will work for you? Well, personally, I will just opt for the easier one, disqualify and move on. And if they challenge me, then I will make them aware that we've discovered the inconsistencies in the information that you've declared, and we invoked this clause. It is there, the service provider signed and declared that they are aware that if there is information that is possibly untrue, then we may disqualify the bid.
I hear you, Sanele. There are lots of problems with this instruction note and with SBD4, and just the definitions are part of it. The fact that it requires us to evaluate for everything for even a 2,500 rand quotation and go through this process is a burden. But just be aware, folk, that 7.5 is not discretionary. It doesn't have a threshold. It said that if the person constitutes a transgression of the Competition Act, so this falls in that the conduct must be reported to the Competition Commission. So be very careful about, you could make those calls and say, well, it might not be cost effective or justifiable to do it for all quotations, and therefore we're just going to disqualify and move on. Just bear in mind that might certainly in itself be a finding one day. Thanks. Good one, Sanele. Let's jump to Chris.
Sure.
Thanks, Sanele. Good one. Hi, Chris. You did raise your hand. Welcome.
Thanks, Shaun. This has been an interesting discussion. Just first of all, to answer your question about the juristic person.
Yeah.
So a natural person is someone like you and I, a human being.
Correct. Yeah.
A juristic person is something like a corporation, company, NGO. Essentially, it has a legal personality, but it exists essentially independent of its members or shareholders. So, for example, in a company, I can hold shares in a company, and then I sell my shares to you. The company still exists. It exists independent of its of its human members. Yeah. So that's basically what.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chris. Yeah. So,
just
so you're
wanted to
sorry, Chris. Just to
Sorry.
check. So you're just helping us understand this issue of the controlling interest, I think, primarily, and the juristic persons, and where that comes in. Thank you, Chris. Go ahead.
Unfortunately, I don't have the details with me now, but there was a case a while ago where I think it was Mike said, damned if you do and damned if you don't. So they answered yes to this question. And it was basically someone bidding on a group on behalf of a group of companies. And the municipality came back to them and said, but you know, there was another company within your group that could also have bid. So you've now colluded by dividing up the market and, you know, reducing competition and all these unfair practices. And, you know, this company then this group had to prove that they actually operate in different markets in terms of skills and, you know, abilities. So, yeah, this is a very difficult question. If you answer it yes or no, you could get yourself into trouble as a bidder.
Yeah. It's I mean, if certainly as I've gone through this in the last couple of months, I'm changing how I'm responding as a bidder, you know, because of the potential scenarios that could come through. Thanks, Chris. I hope this has been helpful to you as well. Let's jump. There was someone else that raised their hand. Who was that? Anina Walker, was it? You're welcome to come on, Anina. Who?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Thanks, Anina. Good one. All right, so there's. Let's just quickly have a look at a couple of the comments. And folk, I have to finish before 11. I've got another Zoom meeting that I have to attend. So let's just have a quick look. Margaret, I am going to try and put this onto the YouTube channel. I'm very late with all the recordings, and so I've just in the last couple of days decided that I'm going to put these on raw. Okay, so there's not going to be any editing. I'm just going to take this exactly as it is and put it onto the YouTube channel. I'm going to put in the chat shortly where the YouTube channel is, and if you just subscribe to that, then you'll be able to just pick up the new ones. Let's have a quick look. Okay, so Felisa, the procuring institutions also rely on these bidders to act in good faith as well. But if they don't disclose properly, now to avoid a bigger risk, we need to further interrogate information provided. I think I need to come back to a point that Sanele also raised, and I'll do that shortly. Francis just is a finance consultant in the municipal arena, so declarations are not new anymore. So, France, are you also seeing that some of the local government institutions are starting to adopt the new SBD4? Because the MBD4, which has always been out, hasn't been changed for local government, and still MBD4 8 and 9 is still being used. And this particular question 2.3 is not directly asked in MBD 9. So just interested to see what you're saying on there. And absolutely, the administrative burden is a big issue. The AG's definition related to something else altogether. So Polisa says, once they identify the non-disclosure, they relate this to irregular expenditure as they feel that would have been appointed incorrectly. I think interpretation is always a challenge. Such a big point, and that's why I was going through and saying, as a bidder, remember, this is not the AG who has to interpret it. This is not National Treasury who has to interpret it. This is the bidder has to interpret the words on this particular document. And so, what do they have at their discretion? They don't have the AG's definition or National Treasury's email that they sent to you. They go to, if they do, how many do, I don't know. They go to, what they think might be potential sources of that definition. And if you look at all of these, it's not described explicitly in the Competition Act. It's not described explicitly in the Companies Act. And so very, very difficult. Should you declare dormant companies? Nampla, that's a great question. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. I would, as a supplier, I would start to also, just thinking about this one, declare dormant companies, but not so much in terms of the Competition Act. I think consider that in terms of perhaps an interest you may have with somebody in the institution, not so much from a collusive activity point. So just bear that in mind. And let me just share with you one of the bid committees that I was involved in. I was secretary to that particular bid committee, and one of the members of the committee, it was found by the AG afterwards, had started a company with one of the directors in one of the bidding companies like 15 years before. That company never traded. It was dormant. It was basically delisted, deregistered, but they picked it up and said, well, you didn't declare, and that yes, that was declared irregular, and that particular person lost his job. Numcla, some RFPs say declare according to CSD. Does this mean if your company is not registered on CSD, you can choose not to declare? Numcla, I'm not sure I understand that. I have seen companies with 100 plus directors essentially answering no, then they add a clause that they do not have visibility on which other companies the directors are involved in. That would be a cop out. That's not going to help you. They have to do something in their company to go through that process and establish with the directors if they do have interest in other companies or not. That's going to be a cop out. That will not be a great one. So good to raise that one. Is the form required when dealing with a sole supplier? Great question. Let's have a quick look at that one. Thanks, Lungile. All procurement, irrespective of the value and method of procurement, excluding petty cash purchases, and must be completed by all persons responding to the invitation. All procurement. And if you think about, Lungile, if you think about the rationale for that, is you want to, in supply chain, understand, even if you're doing a sole sourcing or single sourcing or limited multiple sourcing, you want to understand if there's a conflict of interest. I mean, there could be, particularly in single and sole source, there could be real risk of conflict of interest in that process. So be very careful. Lisa, nice to discuss the other clause on SBD4 2.1 as well as others. Yeah, we certainly can do that at some point. I just did not have enough time to go through it all today. So thank you, Lisa, for that one. Any other questions? Any other comments? Fascinating discussion, fascinating topic that we've got, fascinating space that we're in. Chris Wilcox said that, yes, we hope that the Public Procurement Act is going to resolve these kinds of issues. That can only be a hope for us. Sanele, I haven't responded to your question yet. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's okay, Shaun. Because I see there are no hands, I'm just thinking if I can just deposit this point that, when we start implementing or rolling out the Public Procurement Act provisions, where we move to a modernized environment of the procurement system where we are more system-based and paper-based, maybe, the developers should look into an environment of a back end or a background information search, or what you call synchronization, because these questions should be answered before they get to us.
Yeah.
Because when you run the evaluation process, when the system, if that system would be developed, which would have a possibility of running those pre-evaluation systems, then it can present to you, the preliminary report to say these are the red flags. There's a possibility of conflict of interest between these two bidders, or this one is related to this, all at the system base, so that when we start moving to the next, phases of evaluation, we already know what we are dealing with and how we should apply, the treatment of those companies going forward. But I think that's something for the future.
Good one.
Sure.
Thank you, Sonele. So let me come back to your point. Your point was that the administrative burden of doing this, having to do this for all quotations, and I was just saying, be very careful. The conduct must be reported in terms of the Competition Commission. Must be reported. The conduct must be reported in terms of the Competition Commission. You've got to go through that process. Now, I'm not saying this means you have to delay until the competition comes back. If there's urgency in the award, then you've got another mechanism. That other mechanism is objective criteria 21F. So rather follow the process, report it to the Competition Commission, and if you get to the point where you've got to make this award now, otherwise you're going to have a service delivery issue, then you use objective criteria 21F to give it to another bidder. So very, very important in that one. Don't think that we're delaying the process now because of this. You've got another mechanism, and that's the one. Before I come back to Sonele, let's just jump to Pila. Good morning, Pila.
Good morning, Shaun. Good morning, everyone on the
morning.
platform. I'm just still here. It's a bit noisy. I'm sorry for the background.
It's okay. We can't hear
we
much.
had a
Go ahead.
scenario. Is it okay? We had a scenario in, I think in 2022, with a bid that was going to be 3-year contract, where previously the husband and the wife is a director in one company and the husband is a director in in another company, but they were competing, and we are aware of the relationship because in prior years we would go to their firm to do a due diligence exercise before awarding. And at the time, the husband was acting as a company managing director. So now came 2022, both companies bid it, the price was the same, everything was the same. We picked it up, though you cannot necessarily trace it on the CSD, but we knew. But then when I wrote to Treasury to raise it for probably guidance on how to deal with it, Treasury came back to me to say we would have to prove beyond reasonable doubt that at the time of them completing the bid documents and doing the proposals, a husband and wife may have been sitting in the same table, but we received that response, which then made us to step back a bit and then continue with the award. That contract, we've had the same bid because 3 years has lapsed. It has happened again. They've bidded together again, same price and everything, to an extent that the personnel that the wife's company is using is the same personnel that is listed in the husband's company as key personnel on the project. So that is why I think this debate is quite useful, because now I think perhaps it's time we then conduct the Competition Commission, because as I'm saying, when we wrote to Treasury knowing to raise the alarm, at that time the response was, as I have alluded to. So it's, yeah, they just said we would have to prove beyond reasonable doubt that there is collusion and in fact the entire SBD4 requirements must have been not complied with.
Yeah.
Not only one section of the SBD, and in fact in both cases none of them, of the directors of the companies, have declared any relationship in compiling the documentation and so on. So I just think maybe on this platform, advice on how to approach it.
Nice one, Pilar.
Okay, that's all.
And I think just I would if there's some suspicion of collusion, you report it to the Competition Commission. You don't ask Treasury; they don't have the competence, and nor do you. And and it may have solved the problem that you're experiencing now when they're bidding again, because there was no finding previously. Collusion is not something that's easy to determine, and hence we have this thing called the Competition Commission. Good one, Sanele. Last one, and then we're going to close off.
Sure, last one. On your response, Shaun, I'm trying to get my head around your response and trying to understand if we were to apply the objective criteria to try and solve that particular predicament that you might be facing at the time. Would we not be required to indicate that as we advertise the bid?
No. Under the 2017 regulations, you were required to include the objective criteria in the tender document, but no longer.
So I mean, you can just apply it as and when we deem necessary.
As long as you've at least put a generic clause in your document to say that we reserve the right to use objective criteria in the final award.
Because that's where I'm getting to, because at the same time, when you're advertising each tender, you have declared that these are the means of assessment or evaluation that it's going to use. So if you were to look in the objective criteria, which you did not communicate prior, then that might be seen as extending or more shifting the goalpost and adding other form of evaluation that you didn't declare.
You've got to at least say that you reserve the right to use objective criteria. You don't have to disclose the criteria. And there's legal opinion from Advocate Helen Fenter to that extent as well, just to say that it's impractical to do it, and so it's the right thing that the 2022 regulations do not require you to disclose it. It was only for the 2017 regulations that there was that requirement that objective criteria had to be disclosed. I'm gonna do another one on objective criteria. I did one recently. I for some reason did not record it, but we'll do it again. And I did find the case where there's the particular case said there's an obligation on the procuring institution to consider objective criteria. You can't just ignore it. You must think about objective criteria in that final award.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you. I would agree with you on that respect, that we need to at least reserve the right so that we can at least have that leeway of applying it. And I think the last one before you close, I was slightly of the view or of the opinion that since the objective criteria is provided for in the Preferential Procurement Framework Act, it might be a provision that is to be used in line with preferential application or any sort of preferential specific goals that you would be using or trying to dismantle a problem associated with preferencing, not necessarily to apply it in a in assessment of the procurement system itself. I'm not sure if you get what I'm saying. If we would be able to apply it in matters that may not be related to preferential procurement itself.
Good question. Interesting one. I think there are many cases where it's not been related to preferential procurement. I just think of the Simonia and Lovedale College case, one of the early ones. Many of them, Sanele. So the big issue with objective criteria, folk, is it's all case law that guides us in terms of how we apply it.
All right. No,
Last
we'll
question. Good
dig
one,
in next
Sanele.
time.
Good one.
Sure.
Rose, not sure what the turnaround time is. I've certainly had a response within 2 weeks. It sounds like it's even sooner than that. But many people on here, and I have seen a couple of them already, have said that it could take months. So you need to have another mechanism, and don't feel that because I'm communicating to the Competition Commission, I now have to put this whole thing on hold. No, you report it, you run through the process, and then continue. Okay, France, I'd have to give you a chance. Go for it.
Hi, Shaun. Thank you very much. Morning, everyone. Very
Morning.
quickly. No. So look, I always had an issue why we have SBD and MBD. I mean, they both public institutions. Why don't we just have one form? It's the same, so to speak. But Shaun, just very quickly, one of our biggest cities, that's in Krugersdorp, Mogale City, just quickly went on CSD in one of their current fresher bits that they've put out. They've still not incorporated the new form. So I mean, I deliberately start with SBD, MBD. And I mean, all the changes in the procurement space. I think perhaps in the next round, let's expand the audience, Shaun, and bring this in and take this forward, man. Well done.
Good one.
Supply chain is the biggest problem in the country, by the way. But let's not forget, Shaun, the purpose. I'm still in the background with us wearing bullet-proof vest. Supply chain is a big problem in the country. So the intention, we should always, when we fight these things, we should always look at the bigger intention. I still think the intention is good, but like everything else in public sector, government legislation, complicated for no reason.